The courthouse was never designed for moments like this. It was built for formality, for procedures, for the slow and deliberate grind of justice that unfolds across years, not for the raw, electrifying confrontation that was about to take place. The air inside the federal courtroom felt heavier than any building's walls could justify. Heavy like anticipation, heavy like dread, heavy like a system preparing to test its own limits. Even the reporters allowed inside took their seats with a kind of reverence, knowing they were witnessing a moment that wouldn't just be written about in tomorrow's headlines, it would be dissected in history books for decades. When the doors opened, the room didn't explode with noise. Instead, it fell into a silence so sharp it seemed to carve the air open. Federal agents stepped in first, then marshals, then the figure whose presence had dragged half the nation into a collective state of shock. He was escorted in, not shackled, but undeniably under federal custody. His suit hung differently now, less like a symbol of power and more like armor that no longer fit. His expression was neither defiant nor broken. It was something in between, something unsettled, something searching for footing on a floor that no longer felt stable beneath him. This was his first in-person appearance since the arrest, and unlike the chaos of his residence, unlike the panic among aides, unlike the fury he unleashed on social media, here he was forced into stillness. Here, political theater collapsed under the weight of legal reality. Here, he had to face the judge who now controlled his immediate future. Observers whispered that they had never seen him like this. The bravado that fueled rallies, interviews, and late-night tirades had thinned. Not vanished, but thinned. A man accustomed to towering over every room was suddenly reduced by the very institution he once believed he commanded. The judge entered. Everyone rose. And then it happened. He didn't wait for the formalities. He didn't wait for his attorneys. He didn't wait for the judge to invite statements. He looked up, his voice steady, low, unnervingly controlled, and delivered a message that would soon ricochet across the country. "Your Honor," he said, "I need to speak before we begin." It wasn't a request. It was a declaration. His lawyers froze. Prosecutors stiffened. Security shifted. Even the judge paused, an unusual response from someone known for unshakable discipline. "You may speak," she said cautiously, "but understand that anything you say—" He raised a hand, cutting through the admonition without a word. The courtroom leaned forward, the world leaning with it. He began, "I want the country to understand what's happening here. I want them to see it, to hear it, to know it. This courtroom, this trial, this entire process, this is not justice. This is retribution. Not mine, yours." A low murmur rippled through the room. He continued, each word precise, each sentence delivered like a calculated strike. "You say I am no different from any other citizen. You say the law applies to everyone. And yet here I stand, not because of what I did, but because of who I am. You're not trying me for crimes. You're trying me for winning, for leading, for refusing to bow." The judge's expression hardened, but she let him continue. "Every courtroom I enter, every hearing, every ruling, it was never about law. It was about sending a message. No one is allowed to challenge the system. No one is allowed to question it. And anyone who does will be crushed, destroyed, humiliated." His voice rose, then lowered again, finding a cold, unsettling calm. "And you, Your Honor, are now part of that message." Reporters stared wide-eyed. Prosecutors exchanged glances. His attorneys looked like they were silently begging him to stop. But he didn't. "I know what's coming. I know the sentence you're preparing. I know the pressure you're under. Politicians want a spectacle. Pundits want blood. Donors want a trophy. And the public wants a villain. They want history to see me as the first president to be tried, convicted, and locked away. They want to prove the system is strong, when in reality it's terrified." He pointed toward the prosecution table. "They think this ends with me. They think putting me on trial ends the movement I built." Then he leaned forward, gripping the podium with slow, deliberate intent. "But here's the truth. The moment I walk into this courtroom, the moment I stand here as a defendant, the moment you try to silence me, my voice grows louder, not quieter. My movement grows stronger, not weaker. You think this is the moment I fall? No. This is the moment everything you fear becomes inevitable." The judge finally interjected. "Mr. Trump, this is not a campaign rally. This is a federal courtroom. You are not permitted to deliver political speeches here." He looked at her, almost pitying. This isn't a political speech. This is a warning. The room froze. To you, to them, to everyone who believes this process will break me. He took a breath, slow and intentional. You can take my freedom. You can try to take my legacy, but you will never take control of the story. Because long after this trial ends, long after the cameras stop rolling, long after you issue your sentence, history will judge you, not me. Silence. Not the ordinary silence of a courtroom. This was something else, something unnerving, something hollow, something that echoed. He wasn't finished. You want to punish me? Fine. But understand what you're truly doing. You're setting a precedent, a dangerous one. Because if a former president can be dragged into court by his political opponents, then every future president will be vulnerable. Every leader will fear prosecution the moment they leave office. You're not protecting democracy, you're dismantling it. The judge sat back, expression unreadable, but her eyes sharpened. You are dangerously close, she said, to contempt. He smiled, though the smile didn't reach his eyes. I've been close to worse. His lawyers looked physically ill. And yet, no one missed what had changed. His tone, his posture, his strategy. This wasn't the chaotic fury of a man spiraling. This was calculated, deliberate defiance. He wasn't talking to the judge. He wasn't talking to prosecutors. He wasn't talking to the courtroom. He was talking to the country, to his supporters, to his base, to the world. He shifted again, his voice lowering to a more intimate, unsettling softness. You want the truth? Fine, here it is. I am not afraid of prison. I am not afraid of trial. I'm not afraid of facing whatever penalty you think you can impose. What I fear is what this does to the country, not to me. And what comes next? You can't control it. No matter what sentence you deliver. The judge opened her mouth to respond, but he spoke over her. You want to silence me? Then do it. Sentence me. Lock me away. Strip me of my rights. Put me behind bars. Go ahead. History is watching. And then the moment that would dominate every headline, every broadcast, every social feed, he pointed directly at the judge, not with aggression, but with unnerving certainty. Make your ruling, but understand one thing. Whatever you do next will say more about you than anything I've ever done. The courtroom went dead silent. Not a shift, not a breath, not a rustle. Just pure, stunned stillness. The judge, for the first time since taking the bench that morning, appeared genuinely taken aback. Not intimidated, not threatened, but struck by the sheer audacity of the statement. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't an attack. It was a challenge, a dare. A historic confrontation between a former president and the system sworn to hold him accountable. The judge finally spoke, her voice clipped but steady. Mr. Trump, you will not address the court again unless instructed to do so. Your statement will be entered into the record. The proceedings will continue. He nodded once, not obediently, deliberately, as if to say, my message is delivered. His attorneys leaned in, whispering urgently, but he didn't respond. He kept his gaze fixed forward, jaw set, hands still, as if he had crossed a threshold and could not walk back. The prosecutors looked equal parts stunned and furious. They had anticipated a fight. They had anticipated outbursts. But they had not anticipated this, a speech crafted for history, not for legal strategy. Reporters scribbled furiously, typing frantically, many visibly struggling to keep up with the rapid-fire cascade of statements that would now shape the national conversation. But what no one realized, not yet, was that his message wasn't the most shocking part. The most shocking part was how the judge responded next. She didn't lecture him. She didn't scold him. She didn't threaten further penalties. Instead, she looked directly at him and said, "Your message has been heard. Now hear mine." The room tightened like a drum. Whatever you believe this court represents, whatever you think this process is, whatever narrative you intend to build beyond these walls, I assure you of one thing. This is a courtroom, not a stage, not a rally, and not a weapon. Justice will proceed according to the law, not according to fear. The tension was suffocating. Now, she added, we begin. And with those words, the hearing officially started. Yet everyone knew they had already witnessed the real moment of the day. The moment that left the courtroom silent. The moment that would echo for decades. No one could predict what would come next, except that it would be worse, more explosive, more consequential, because this confrontation, the message, the silence, the challenge, was only the beginning. The real storm was still approaching, and the judge had just set the stage for the next clash. A clash that would shake the country even harder than the arrest itself. The courtroom hadn't recovered from the shock of his message when the judge signaled for the proceedings to continue. But anyone watching closely could tell the room wasn't the same anymore. Something had shifted, something invisible but unmistakable, like the moment before a storm when the air becomes too still, too quiet, too charged. The prosecutors rose first, but even they looked rattled. Their carefully prepared statements, their methodical timeline, their bullet point arguments, none of it carried the same confidence after what had just happened. They were entering a courtroom that had already been emotionally detonated. The lead prosecutor, a measured, meticulous attorney known for his almost surgical delivery, attempted to regain control of the narrative. "Your Honor, the government intends to proceed with the standard procedural steps." But the judge cut him off, her tone sharp but controlled. "No. Before we proceed with the government's presentation, the court will address the defendant's statement." The room stiffened again. The prosecutor hesitated. "Your Honor, with respect—" She raised a hand, silencing him instantly. Mr. Trump's remarks were not typical. They were not procedural. They were not expected. They must be acknowledged. That alone would dominate evening news cycles. The judge turned toward the defendant, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Trump, what you said carries significant legal and political implications. This court will not allow itself to be turned into a platform for political messaging." He didn't respond, not verbally, but the faint lift of his eyebrow was enough to say, "You already allowed it." She continued, "However, the court must be realistic. Your remarks are now part of the public record. They will be interpreted, misinterpreted, analyzed, weaponized, and repurposed in ways that exceed this courtroom's control. The law operates within this room. Public perception does not." A subtle tremor ran through the audience. This wasn't just a judge speaking. This was the system speaking, and yet she wasn't done. "What you said today was intended to influence those outside this courtroom. That cannot be ignored, nor can the possibility that your remarks were designed to provoke a reaction, political or otherwise." Prosecutors exchanged uneasy glances. She continued more slowly now. "But understand this. While you may attempt to shape public opinion, you cannot shape this court's process. You cannot dictate its schedule. You cannot disrupt its function, and you cannot intimidate its duty." Her voice lowered, becoming almost deadly in its calmness. "This court will proceed, impartially, efficiently, and relentlessly." A sharp silence followed. Then she turned back to the prosecutors. "You may continue." But the moment, the seismic moment, had already altered the entire trajectory of the hearing. The prosecutor inhaled, regrouped, and began again. "Your Honor, the government is prepared to outline the charges and the procedural posture following the Supreme Court's denial of the final appeal." The words landed heavily. Everyone knew what they meant. No more delays, no more shields, no more legal gymnastics. The appeals were over. The arrest was real. The trial was inevitable. The prosecutor adjusted his glasses, unfolding a sheet of paper. "The government intends to present evidence that the defendant engaged in a multi-step conspiracy to obstruct a constitutionally mandated process. This includes—" But before he could finish, the defendant leaned toward his attorney and whispered something. The lawyer stiffened, shook his head, whispered back frantically. The judge noticed immediately. "Is there an issue at the defense table?" The attorney swallowed hard. "Your Honor, the defendant requests permission to address the court again." A collective gasp rippled across the room. The judge's expression hardened. "No. He has spoken once. He will not speak again without direct permission. This is a courtroom, not a podium." The attorney nodded quickly, but the defendant slowly rose to his feet anyway. Security instantly shifted. The judge snapped, "Sit down, now." But he didn't. He placed both hands on the table, leaning forward slightly, his posture commanding but controlled. And then he delivered a line that would ignite every political circle in Washington. "Your Honor, I will sit when I'm finished saying what I need to say." His lawyers froze, faces pale. The judge's voice dropped to a warning murmur. "You are risking a contempt charge." He didn't blink. "Do it. Add it. Make it part of the story." The tension in the room reached a boiling point. The judge stared at him, evaluating, calculating, weighing whether escalating the moment would give him exactly the spectacle he wanted. Finally, she exhaled sharply. "You have 60 seconds, not one more." His attorney buried his face in his hands. He took the moment, letting the silence stretch just enough to grip the room by the throat. Then he began, "You say this court will proceed impartially. You say the law is the only force that matters here. But I want the country to hear something clearly." He turned, addressing not the judge but the cameras, knowing full well they would pick up every word through sketch artists, transcripts, and live reporting. "I am not afraid of you. I am not afraid of this court, and I will not be quiet while this process plays out." Then the message shifted, this time not to the judge, not to the prosecutors, but directly to the nation. "You think bringing me here will break my supporters? It will not. It will unite them. You think these charges will end my influence? They will amplify it. Every attempt to silence me only strengthens the movement." Reporters typed so fast, their keys clicked like rain. He continued, "And to the millions watching who feel powerless, who feel unheard, who feel trapped by a system that punishes dissent, this is not my fight alone. This is yours." The judge pounded her gavel once hard. "Your time is up." But he didn't stop. "Do what you want with me, but understand this. If you think this ends with a verdict, you are wrong. This ends with a reckoning." The judge slammed the gavel again. "Enough. Sit down, or I will have you removed." He sat. But he didn't sit in defeat. He sat like a general who had just delivered orders from the battlefield. Prosecutors looked shaken. Defense attorneys looked terrified. The judge looked furious. And yet something else stirred in the room. Fear, not fear of violence, fear of consequences, fear of what this case meant for the country, fear of how divided the nation already was and how much deeper that divide might become. The prosecutor attempted to continue, but his voice lacked its earlier strength. "Your Honor, as I was saying, the government intends to—" "No," the judge said abruptly. "We're going to address this first." She turned toward the defense table. "Mr. Trump, your statements are now part of the record. You have created a risk of influencing witnesses, inflaming public rhetoric, and undermining the integrity of these proceedings." He opened his mouth to respond, but she raised a hand sharply. "Do not interrupt." Her eyes sharpened. "This court must now consider whether additional conditions are required to ensure the integrity of the trial, including potential restrictions on your public statements." A collective gasp erupted. Trump's eyes narrowed. "This court," she continued, "will not allow intimidation, direct or indirect, to shape this process." His shoulders tightened, but he didn't speak. She leaned forward. "Let me be clear. If you continue using this courtroom as a political stage, I will impose communication restrictions. If you violate them, I will revoke your release conditions." The room froze. She was threatening to jail him pre-trial. Even for him, that was nearly unthinkable. He finally spoke, softly but with a chilling precision. "You do that, and you prove everything I just said." The judge stared at him for a long moment. Then she said something that would become one of the most repeated lines of the entire crisis. "The law does not bend to your narrative, and it will not break under your pressure. Not here. Not today." She turned to the prosecutors. "You may continue." But again, everyone knew the legal presentation was no longer the story. The story was the confrontation. The story was the message. The story was the silence after it. And when the prosecutor resumed outlining the charges, the words felt like echoes compared to the detonations that had just occurred. He listed documents, communications, witness testimonies, procedural violations, but eyes drifted back to the defense table, where the former president now sat perfectly still, his expression unreadable. He wasn't watching the prosecutor. He was watching the judge. The prosecutor outlined timelines, evidence, key witnesses, expert analysis, but no one could focus. Not fully. Not after what had just happened. And then something unexpected happened. The judge interrupted again. "Counsel, one moment." The prosecutor stopped mid-sentence. The judge turned toward the defendant. "Mr. Trump, before we move forward, the court must clarify something with you directly." The room tensed once more. "Just once. Do you intend to comply with the rules of this courtroom moving forward? Or do you intend to continue using your appearances as political messaging opportunities? He leaned back, folding his hands. That depends. The judge's jaw tightened. Depends on what? He spoke slowly, deliberately. Depends on whether the court intends to treat me as a criminal or as a political target. A ripple of shock moved through the audience. The judge inhaled sharply. You are being treated as neither. You are being treated as a defendant. He nodded once. Then I will behave as one. It sounded like cooperation, but everyone knew better. The judge pressed further. And does that mean you will refrain from further political statements in this courtroom? He paused. Then, I will refrain from statements that you interpret as political. His lawyers closed their eyes. The judge stared at him for several long seconds. Very well, she said finally, but understand that this court, not you, determines what qualifies as political. He didn't respond. She returned to the prosecutors. Proceed. The prosecutors continued outlining the case, but the energy had shifted again. This time darker, colder, more volatile. Outside the courthouse, crowds were swelling. Supporters clashed with critics. News cameras lined the street. Drones hovered overhead. Chants echoed against the marble. Inside, the prosecutor's voice droned through evidence and timelines, but the real drama had already played out. And yet, the most shocking moment was still ahead. After an hour of procedural explanations, the judge announced a recess. The gavel fell. Everyone exhaled. Reporters rushed out. Marshals surrounded the defendant. Lawyers scrambled to regain control of the narrative. But as the judge stood to leave, the former president did something no one expected. He looked directly at her and said quietly but audibly, "You still haven't heard the real message." The judge froze. Slowly, she turned back. "And what message is that?" He leaned forward. "The one I'll deliver at sentencing." A chill shot through the room. Sentencing. Not trial, not verdict, sentencing. It was as if he had acknowledged, even embraced, the possibility of conviction, not as defeat, but as opportunity. The judge stared at him, searching for meaning in his expression. He didn't blink. She said nothing. Then she turned and walked out, her robe sweeping behind her like a dark wave. The marshals led him away. His attorneys followed, shaken and pale. The courtroom emptied slowly, quietly, almost uncertainly. Something had changed, something profound. And as the doors closed behind the judge, one thought echoed through every mind present. Whatever happens next will be unlike anything the country has ever seen. This wasn't the end. This wasn't even the trial. This wasn't even the collapse. This was the moment before the collapse. The moment when the system realized it was facing not just a defendant, but a force it had never been designed to contain. And the next confrontation, his next message, wouldn't leave the courtroom silent. It would leave the entire country breathless.